What up, everyone? Here to do a quick overview of this coming up week. So I'm going to go ahead and jump in and just get started. So starting off, I'm looking at the econ calendar and the ER calendar. So right away jumps off. We do have CPI and PPI this week. We have a lot of data coming out: retail sales, jobless claims, housing permits, industrial production, Philadelphia Fed manufacturing index. All these big reds are potential big market movers. So definitely something I'm keeping an eye on in the time that everything's released. And also this Friday is OPEX. So another thing I'm keeping on this Friday, the 17th. Jumping into the earnings this week, there's not too many big names that stand out to me. We do have Dollar General, FedEx, XPEV, Adobe, a couple names. So those are kind of what I'm keeping an eye on here. And now I'm going to jump into the charts. First thing, like I always do, I like to come in, look at what the expected move is of the week and how we did last week. So closing price on SPY is 385. We have an expected move of about almost $12. So the volatility this week and the expected move of it is pretty high. This brings us between a range of almost 410 to 360 on SPY. Just to get perspective, like I like to do, last week we had an expected move of almost $8, which is pretty much average. Um, SPY and IWM both fell out of the two standard deviations, and everything else was stayed within, most of them within the first. So looking at that and knowing we have a big expected move, I want to make sure I factor that in. So at some point, there's probably going to be a big move this week. So jumping into the chart, uh, we dumped pretty hard the last couple days, especially Thursday, Friday. We had a lot of volume coming in Friday as we broke down below 390 support into this 385 area. So looking at some levels, I'm watching this 385 to 383 area support. A break below that, I have 380 to 378, this little zone, down to this 375 area. To the top side, we have this 388 as resistance, 388 to 390. This 393, which is a pretty key area on Friday, which is where we came and retested before we broke down, up to this 399 to 400, potentially into this 405s. So that's what I'm watching on SPY as my support and resistance. Jumping into QQQ. QQQ was a little stronger compared to, like I said, like the expected move. It stayed within its range compared to SPY and IWM. So looking at the chart, zoom in a little bit. I'm keeping an eye on this 288, 287 area. We had a pretty nice bounce right here. If we break below that, my next real support is this 282 to 280, and then below that we have like this 275. We do have a small gap down here around this 272, 273. So it is something to keep an eye on out of. On the upside, 290 is support, then this 290, 250 area. Then next support resistance above that is this 296, then to this 298, 300 area, which is kind of a more psychological key area that I'll be watching. I did draw this little trend line on the top just to see if we come up to retest it and respect it. We could see a reject around this 296 area if we come up to this area throughout the week. Next, we have IWM, which was the weakest overall. Actually created a gap at this 180 area. You can see we flushed pretty hard. So we did bounce off this 175 support. So I am keeping, which is this base right here that we bounced. So this is the support area, this 175, 174 area. Below that, I have 172 down to this 170. As support resistance, I have 170, 50, this 178 area. If we push above that, I would like to see if we fill this gap and then possibly reject around this 181 and 182 area. Next resistance would be this 185 to 187. So those are some key areas I'm keeping an eye on through this week on some of the indices. Next, jumping into some stocks I'm watching, starting with Apple. If we look at Apple on the weekly time frame, we've actually kind of just been sitting in this base right here. So we've been sitting between this 157 to this 145 area all week, or the last couple weeks. So looking at the chart, I drew a trend line here, so I'm seeing we're kind of starting to develop a trend. So I'm seeing if we respect this trend. line right here and potentially bounce. So I'm watching these key areas for this 147 area. If we break below, we could see this gap filling and pushing down to this 144, 145 area for potential support. Next support would be this 141 to 140. If we're able to hold above this and stay above 150, I'll be looking at 154 to 155 as resistance up to this 157.50 area, which has been a key area of resistance. Break above this, we could push up into the 160s pretty quickly. AMD, same thing. AMD has been pretty relatively strong and holding up. This 186 to 187.8 area has been a pretty key area. It's been pretty rejecting pretty hard every time we come to test that area. So pull up the chart. So I see a potential symmetrical triangle forming on AMD, which could be some indecision and potentially to a bigger move. So I'm keeping an area on this 186 to 188 area. If we're able to break above and hold above, we could see a nice move up into this 195, into this 95s. And then I'm looking at $80 as support. If we break below 80, look for a push down to the 75, 76 area into these gaps and then start filling some of these downside gaps. As you can see on Thursday, we broke above 186 and rejected it pretty hard. And Friday, we came up to retest, never got it and broke down. So these are two key areas, this $86 and this 80 area that I'm keeping an eye on. Next, we have Amazon. Amazon a couple days ago looked a little stronger around this area when we bounced and when we got a nice push out of it and then rejected pretty hard above this 96 area. So now looking at Amazon, I see a potential descending triangle forming. This $90 area, this support is going to be pretty key. Support, if we break below that, I'm watching 87 and then targeting this gap fill down to $85. If we are able to hold above this $90 area or bounce off 90, 93.50 is my resistance, then this 96 area, which has been a pretty key resistance. Then if we're able to break above this, we can push up into this $100. So I'm looking for a trend line break either way. Next, we have Meta. Meta could potentially, we have a very straight trend line here and a potential line over and a trend line at the top. So it might be forming a potential ascending wedge. We do have a lot of gaps to the downside and some really big gaps. So I am watching this either way. We could break the trend and come down, or we can finally break above and push up. So I'm keeping an eye on this 177, 178 area as this would hold the trend line for a potential move to the upside as a bounce. If we break below this, I'm going to look for this gaps to be targeted. Next support would be this 170 to 168, breaking down to this 163, potentially all the way down to this 155 area. If we're able to hold above this 178 area, I'll be looking at this 184 to 185. It's resistance, then next 190, pushing into this 195 to 197. That's what I'm watching on Meta. Even though this is a bullish pattern, we do have a lot of gaps, so I do want to keep that in mind. And big data coming out this week. So either way, we can play this. Now I have Microsoft next. Microsoft also forming a little symmetrical triangle. I'm watching how we hold this support at 248. If we break below that, my next support is 240, down to this 244, then 240, breaking down to this next to this 234, 235 area. We are able to hold this 148 area to 250 area. I'll be looking at reactions around 250, 255 would be my next resistance up to this 260. If we're able to break above this 260, we could see filling into the gap. So that's what I'm keeping an eye on here. And SQ. SQ is kind of in a little downtrend channel right here. We had a lot of volume step in on Friday. I even highlighted it right here into this doji candle, which means it shows to me that once we broke below the 70 to 68 area, there's a lot of buyers potentially stepping in. And this 74 to 75 area, there's a lot of sellers stepping in, which form this doji with a lot of volume. So those are my key areas of support and resistance. I'm watching the key area of the $70 to $68 as my support. If we do break below it, I'm watching 65s and down in the 62.50. If we're able to hold or bounce off this area, I'm watching the 74.50 as my bigger resistance area. If we break above, my next resistance would be 78 up to this $80 area, which would be the top of this trend line, where we can look for another rejection or a breakout above. Next, Tesla. Same with Tesla. Tesla has been relatively weak. We had a huge move to the downside this past week, almost over $30. Um, I've actually mentioned this. I've been kind of keeping an eye on this for a couple weeks now, and we did actually bounce on Friday. So there's a potential inverse head and shoulders forming here, and this 65 to $68 range was the area I was targeting for potential bounce to complete this. So I am keeping this area, the 168 to 165 area, as a zone of support. If we're able to hold this zone, my next targets would be resistance would be 178, then 185, pushing up into this 190 to 196 area. If we're not able to hold this support, I'm looking for it to break down to this 160. Then my next support would be this 154. If we're not able to hold 154, we could fill this whole gap pretty quickly and come down to this 145s. We had a lot of volume, same thing, right at support with a doji, and a lot of volume supporting it. So that shows to me that there is some interest at this level. So this is what I'm gonna be keeping an eye on. I would like to see us come back into this area, and buyers step in for a potential move to the upside. So that is what I'm keeping an eye on this week. Like I mentioned, we do have a lot of data coming out with CPI, PPI, OPEC. So it's a filled week of volatility and data. So, trade safe and be smart. Remember what time the data is coming out, and just trade what you see. Let's have a great week. Thank you.